Thank you very much for that, Risteárd. Really great insight, and I suppose a really good contrast from our first lecture, which was more sort of theoretical and the type of sort of built heritage that we find, particularly in Gaelic Ireland, and then to yours, which sort of drills down more in terms of practicalities of potential restoration, and what people might like to do in that sort of space. And I'm quite conscious there are people in the audience who have castles or who have been involved in the renovation of castles. So when we go to the Q&A, if they have any questions, I would encourage them to sort of chime in. But I might just pick your brain, so to speak, for a minute. So you sort of gave, I suppose, an overview in terms of what people need to know from the sort of legislative statutory basis for the initial application to then progress, through to the actual sort of renovation. But you might speak perhaps a little bit, even generally, about what are the sort of basic mistakes or errors that people fall into when they decide to restore a historical building.
Yes, well, when it comes to mistakes, I suppose I made all of them. So I'm an expert on mistakes. But basically the mistake is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and there's no doubt about that. I've seen people repair tower houses and historic buildings using cement. It doesn't work. Cement does not work with old buildings. I've seen people using cement with 2 shovels of lime thrown into the barrow, saying, no, we have lime, we're okay. No, you're not. I've seen people making up mortar by going down to the hardware shop and buying hydrated lime and putting it in the mix. No. You need to know your stuff. Hydrated lime can be bought anywhere in any hardware shop, but it's only used for improving grassland, and there's no value whatsoever in building. So the lime I'm talking about is hydraulic lime, and it's called hydraulic because it sets underwater. And the Romans used it for building piers and harbours, and the Board of Works used it up to the 1940s for the same job. And it's the old burnt lime that we heard of long ago from our grandfathers. And it has a chemical reaction with the mortar. Hydrated lime has no chemical reaction whatsoever. You'll know hydraulic lime because once you put it into a bucket and you put water on it, it'll boil. It'll boil. It's dangerous. It'll spatter and boil. So that's the first mistake, is people think lime is lime. It's not. But lime is the buzzword of conservation. It's used for repointing. It's used for bedding stones. It's used for plastering inside and out, all different types of plaster, all made from lime. So that is the biggest mistake that I think. Other times, people think they know a skill or a craft because they've worked in the buildings for the last 5 years, but they don't realize historic buildings were built differently than they are today. Even I've seen slaters putting on a roof wrongly. I trained myself as a carpenter with my father-in-law, who was a master carpenter, when I was a teenager. So I suppose I came to this subject from the other end, from the building side and the contracting side, something I still love. And I still do a lot of stone cutting and stone carving, as you know. It's important, I suppose, to see it from both sides. I remember studying the masons long ago, the masons that built the tower houses in Ireland and Scotland. And of course, they could travel back and forth, and they did a lot. But the architect of a tower house had to be, in Gaelic, a seer. And seer has many meanings. But in Irish, it means stonemason, seer, seir tithe. In Scotland, it means a carpenter, seir amage. And it also means free, lá seir. So it meant if you were a seer, you had to be a master of both trades, carpentry and masonry. And you were allowed to travel freely. Basically, the Freemasons, as we talk about them. Anyway, I don't know what brought me onto that.
No, that's very interesting.
Right.
You sort of mentioned there about lime and the sort of importance of getting it right in terms of lime for historical buildings. I'm just wondering, obviously there's numerous reasons why these buildings internally and externally were covered in lime and whitewashed. One of which, as I understand it, was to increase light and the sort of to make the buildings lighter inside.
Yeah.
But was there a hygienic function
There
as
was.
well? You might talk us through that. a
There
bit.
was, of course, yeah. Lime is a biocide, and as such, it kills all germs. Now, I'm not saying that the medieval Irish knew all about germs, but they certainly knew that lime kept things clean. And so everything was lime washed. I remember as a young soldier in the army, one of our jobs was to lime wash the toilet blocks every few months. And we used to think this was very archaic. You know, why wouldn't they go out to Dulux and buy paint? But it was there was a reason for it. It was, and the other thing is you'll often hear of people who have wells or springs in their back garden. They will put down lime once a year to clean out the well and to kill all. Did you ever hear that?
No, I haven't
And
actually.
clear the
Okay.
bacteria. Yeah, you put lime into a well for that reason. But as you say, it has three functions. It brightens up a place as well, you know. And when you widen braziers of windows with lime, it'll reflect light, especially when you're very narrow windows in a building. But also, lime kills dampness. Because it takes in water and then it breathes and it drives out water in dry air and during summertime. So it has a lot of functions, but I think another main function of lime is that it actually repairs itself. If you get a hole in lime or if you get a crack, over the next few years, lime will grow again and seal up the crack, you know. So it was replaced by cement in the 1940s. And the main reason it was replaced by cement was because cement was half the price. And if you try and buy lime today, it's still twice the price of cement. But people didn't realize in the 1940s that there was a reason why we used lime for the last 1,000 years, you know.
Indeed. I noticed on one of the slides, I think pertaining to Clonrush, you had that very interesting historical plaque which you helped erect.
Oh,
I
yeah.
understand Carrigaholt Castle is another example of a community
Yes.
a group erecting signs as well. And there's numerous other examples, of course, around the country. What does one need to do to secure permissions from the council to erect signs? I'm conscious that there are clans here who would be interested to erect such signs indicating historical areas and so forth. So I'm just wondering from your sort of leverage your experience, Risteárd.
Well, I can sum that up in one word. You need the owner's permission. And if it's on private ground, you don't need permission from the county council. You need it from the owner if you're putting up an information plaque. Now, you might get an objection if the information was all wrong, in some way to somebody, but that's not what we're talking about. But if you're on a public road, yeah, you're certainly going to need the roads engineer will come out to see will it affect traffic or something else. But you certainly need permission of the council, yeah.
And is it recommended to engage not just with signs, but also with any historical building projects to engage perhaps initially with the conservation officer in the various counties?
Yes, yeah. I think the first call would be the conservation officer. Some people try and avoid the conservation officer, but it's not a good idea because generally they know what's going on, and they can often point you in the right direction and can often reduce your costs by telling you this isn't required and that's not required, and you don't need a conservation engineer for that building. It's fine as you know. So it is useful certainly to contact the conservation officer. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. We might have time for one or two questions from the floor. Shane, if we just bring a microphone down to him, please.
I'll speak. I'll project. Risteárd, thank you very much for that, and indeed highlighting Risteárd Castle, which is our focal point for any of our clan gatherings and inauguration of our chieftain. You talk about the castle and all the work that was done in relation to that, but my question could apply to any restorations. Putting in electricity, putting in water, putting in toilets, how do you manage that as a matter of interest?
Well, oh no, you do. Basically, you're talking about the same building a house. You know, you have to have it brought on site, or you have to plumb it into a local sewerage scheme, or you have to put in a septic tank, or you have to have a water scheme, or you have to have a well, or whatever. The problem arises once you get into the castle. Where does it go? Are you going to bore holes through all the walls? Luckily, nearly all the tower houses in Ireland have toilets. They have what's called a garderobe, exactly. And a garderobe is a shaft that runs up through the building from the top to the bottom. It's about 1 meter square. And that's ideal because you can use that for plumbing and wiring, and then you can feed into all the various rooms out of the garderobe shaft, you know. So that's what we did in Dysart, and yeah, it's very useful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Bruno Darlig.
Notice in when I off and on when I do a bit of research, Cashlon Gal comes up a lot, and it's named particularly in bardic poetry, but also in texts.
Yeah.
Cashlon Gal.
Yeah.
I presume that bright castle.
Yeah.
Is something to do with lime or the brightness.
It is. Gal in Irish means bright, but in Scots Gaelic it means white. So it could be, in medieval times, there was no distinction between the two dialects. So it could mean the White Castle or the Bright Castle. I presume that the color of the lime went off after a while, and maybe if somebody refreshed it with a lime wash, it became known as the White Castle, you know, as opposed to all the other cream-colored ones that didn't get the same treatment, you know. Yeah.
Just maybe on that point, we have a particular reference, which I have in mind, from circa 1590 by the bardic poet Taig MacDara of Vroda to the O'Davrans of Cahir MacNaughton in the Burren, whereby he refers to the white liss of Cahir MacNaughton, the white fort or stone enclosure. So potentially that, to your point,
Yes,
was
yes.
also whitewashed, and in the stone, as you know well, Brian, in the stony landscape of the Burren, that would really stand out. I'm wondering if there was another more symbolic aspect of whitening these castles with lime, in the sense that they stood out in the landscape, so it spoke to that kind of status of the individuals living there.
I don't think the purpose was anything more than just waterproofing them and damp-proofing them, you know. But it's funny you should mention that. I came across a reference in Kilkee in the 1840s, and I'm trying to remember now, 40 Days in Kilkee or something was the name of the book, you know. Yeah, is it? Yes, by Mrs. Knox. That's right.
Eleanor Knox.
Eleanor
2
Knox.
months in Kilkee, no?
And she spent before
1836.
before the famine happened. She spent quite amount of time in Kilkee. But the one thing she did notice is that all the houses were painted white. All the poor people, and this was only 5 years before the famine. Everyone painted their house white. She said, not only the walls, but the roofs, the flag roofs. Now, and since then, somebody sent me a photograph, of a house in Wales with a stone roof painted white as well, you know. So it must have looked like an island in Greece, you know, with all this white lime that was going on. Everything was painted, you know.
Just without the weather, presumably.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question before. The gentleman down the back here.
No, I was interested there in cleaning out the well. What's the type of lime? What like, it's not agricultural lime, but it's the
It's the hydraulic lime now.
hydraulic lime.
But I'm not promoting putting lime into a well, because I have no idea what effect that might have on your family or your animals or anyone else, you know.
No, it just happens I have a well, but if I was going to put it down,
But
I wouldn't use the water for a month or two anyway.
Yeah, what I would do is I Google it, lime in wells. I just Google it and see what information is out there, you know. But I know it's common practice around Clare once upon a time. I wouldn't say there's anyone doing it nowadays, but it used to be very common. Yes?
To Michael.
Where do you find hydraulic lime in Ireland?
Yeah, there are 4 companies producing it in Ireland. Off the top of my head, there's the traditional lime company, County Carlow. There's Inishannon Lime Company, County Cork. There's another one in County Down. And I can't think of their names now.
Okay.
But you'll get them. But it's hydraulic lime you'll be looking for.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have John Farrell here, perhaps the last question.
It's not so much a question, it's just an observation on putting lime into a well. I remember my late father putting lime into a well in Longford.
Yes. Yes.
When I was born in 1964, so now you know what age I am, we had no running water in the house at home,
Yes.
the farmhouse at home.
Yeah.
And there was a well field, was
Yeah.
typical of the time.
Yeah.
And I can recall my father putting lime in the well
Yes.
prior to us
Yes.
getting the piped water.
Thanks for that.
About
Yeah,
1968.
yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. So on that note, Gurmil Mahagat, Risteárd. Thank you very much.